Join me in welcoming Michael Reppas. Hey, Michael, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Steve, how are you?
I am doing really good. So looking forward to hearing about this book. So we've been on kind of a journey for people that have been watching the books over the course of this last year. And the last book was a lawyer perspective. You know, you went into court and, kind of, I think won personally. I mean, I'm not a judge, but I'll play one on TV. The court case for the Parthenon marbles and the Parthenon being owned by the right people. But this is more of the story version of it. So let's start off. First, tell us a little bit about your background so they know how that you got interested in this to begin with.
Sorry about that. Well, yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, Steve. I really appreciate it. And I love your interest in archaeology and this particular, subject, which is near and dear to me. So when I was doing my master's of international law, I wrote a paper on one very particular set of antiquities that had been looted, and they were from Greece, and they were part of the Parthenon, and they were all these beautiful sculptures that were still on the face of the Parthenon until the English came in the early 1800s, very early 1800s, and ripped them all off. They tore them off with crowbars, and they had saws. They had about 100 laborers, and they paid off the Turks who had occupied Greece and were still, the authority in all of Greece, including Athens. They paid them all off. They ripped these things off for nearly 9 years, boxed them all up, and shipped them to England. Ultimately, the English Parliament bought them and donated them to the British Museum. And from that point to today, they have been part of the British Museum's collection. They are owned by, and I used owned in parentheticals here, they're owned by the British, and they're not owned by the Greeks anymore. They refuse to return them. All types of diplomatic efforts have been rejected, repeatedly. So I was just really shocked that the law didn't support the Greeks. I couldn't understand how an occupied people, they were effectively slaves. I couldn't understand how an occupied people, for almost 400 years they were slaves. If I could add, from 1483, they were still occupied by the Turkish, empire. So I couldn't understand how can you steal one of the most notable pieces of a country's, cultural identity, the Parthenon, for God's sake. How can you just let that be torn apart and sent to another museum, first of all? And then how can you let the people who ripped it off claim that they own it? It just, for me, it was just so offensive. What the heck is going on with the law? Why is the law like that? So that's what inspired me to write my first legal article about it. I was very fortunate. I published in a really well established, law review. And I started lecturing about it, and sort of my level of interest expanded. I started giving bigger and bigger lectures. I lectured in front of UNESCO before. I've been, the inauguration of the Parthenon Museum, the new museum in Athens. I was very pleased to be invited to join that group. I formed a non-for-profit organization to try to, address looted antiquities and why they have to be returned. And the book that you were referring to was sort of my, legal analysis. Hey, let's pretend there was a lawsuit right now. And if there was a lawsuit right now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, give you all the facts, and I want you to be the jury, and let's hear the case and you decide. That was the first book that you were referencing. Why don't we just sue the British Museum? This one is a novella, and I decided, first of all, since I knew that time so well, I thought, let's put a personal spin on it, and instead of looking at it from, the academic sort of way, let's look at it from people who actually lived there in that time. What was it like to effectively to be a slave in an occupied country? What was it like? And did anyone try to stop them? So I did a lot of research, and I found, there was actually a pretty big movement to try to stop them from looting all those pieces. And, within 20 years later, actually, Greece fought for their independence and won. So this was part of this was part of a real, a real effort on the part of the Greeks to get their identity back, and the looting of the Parthenon actually, inspired a lot of them to say, we're not going to do that. We're not going to take this anymore. We're not going to be slaves. We have to fight and get our independence. So that's why the novella for me was interesting and rewarding, because it really took it from, the people who live there and their sacrifices, and what does this treasure actually mean to them. It's like us with the with the Statue of Liberty, as for example. It has a lot of meaning for Americans. It has a lot of meaning. It's very significant, especially first generations, but also second generations. It's a big symbol for us. And if someone would take the time and just think, well, how would you feel if, let's say when we were still, if America wasn't able to do anything about it, and somebody came in and just chopped the head off and sent it to a museum in Egypt, and chopped the arm off and sent it to a museum in Australia, and and the beautiful book sent it somewhere, and then not only will they not return it to the U.S., but then they say, sorry, we own the head now. I own it. It's a different country. We own it. It's in our museum. What would we Americans do? We'd go to war. We would bomb. We would carpet bomb. We would destroy. We would ban. We would go back. But Greece, they're a small country. They can't do that. And they're not the only small country that's been exploited like this. So that's why this book sort of culminated, to where it was. I really wanted to personalize it and give people an opportunity to sort of feel what it would be like, A, to be a slave, and then B, to watch your national treasure being ripped from you without you being able to do anything about it.
I love, in fact, that the British Museum refers to them as the Elgin marbles. The Lord Elgin that stole them, they're his. It's like, I go to your house and I steal your car, and then I donate it to charity as my car.
Right. You're not only recognizing, a thief, but you're rewarding him for his conduct. But you're also stripping away the ownership by doing that title too. If you called them the Parthenon Sculptures from Greece, then people would immediately, in their heads, would associate ownership with Greece, and they would think there was. But this is a perfect way to sever that completely by changing the name.
So tell us a little bit about the main characters in the story and how they interact throughout the story.
Well, what I thought was very important to do was to create a family, and to explain what family life would be like then, who would be doing what role, how they would get by their day and day. And then also try to, to set up a situation whereby, you could add a little, story to the basic facts, and sort of tie that today. Because, when you write historical fiction, it's still fiction. So you have to use your best efforts to accurately describe, the setting, in that historical sense. At that time, in that place, they didn't have marble on the floor. They had dirt on the floor, and they had to keep that somehow, and they had to brush that, and they had, sort of carpets, and you have to accurately, what did they eat? How many times a day did they eat? What all these things you have to be clear about, but you also have to. You can't create too much fiction, in other words, such that you can't create hyper intelligent, well-read characters in a time when they were slaves. You have to be accurate and understand that, well, these people would not have had access to pretty much any books other than perhaps a Bible, that they would have had to keep hidden from their, from their Muslim overlords. So it was, in other words, in order to paint the right family, you also had to paint the surroundings. So who did they associate with? There was a priest. Well, the priest probably would have been the most educated person amongst them. So you have to write, such that you allow that to be known, and then you also have people who, had zero education at all. And, and you have to find a good mix in there, and be able to, be honest with them and still try to keep a story, together and going forward with enough emotion, and honesty that people would believe in these characters. So that's what I tried to do.
So you formerly named the book Ateni Samjak, which is one of the characters' names.
No, it's actually the name of the city where they
Oh,
ruled.
okay.
Yeah, because back then there was no Athens, there was no Greece. They were run by samjaks. Samjaks are sort of like provinces. How the British would divide up areas for, a lord would have this particular geographic area, and sort of the Muslims did the same thing. They were run by samjakis, these lords who ran these areas, and this one took place in Athens, what was called Athens at the time. So Ateni Samjak. That's just what that province was called. But it was too confusing for people. It sounded very difficult, very academic, and I think it lost a lot of people.
So you changed the title to Make Me Breathless and I Will Still Sing.
Yeah.
What does that mean? How does that reflect in the book?
Well, I think the title, may be a little artsy, but I think what's significant to me about that title and why I really like it so much is because it really portrays the life of the slave, in that, whatever you do to me, you can beat me, I'm still going to rise. And in this case, you can silence me and I'm still going to sing. You can knock the wind out of me, strip my core. I'm still going to, whatever you do, I'm still going to succeed. We are going to get freedom. You can kill me and we're still going to get freedom. We will still be free. So it was just, one of those many type of ideas I was tossed around. And I just thought that was a good way to sort of capture, what these main characters, were feeling.
So let's take and it's so hard to identify who's the most evil character, but let's take the real bad guy, Lord Elgin, who was the overseer of all the theft, and is now the owner of the marbles. How hard was it to write him in such a way that you also had that, I don't know if you can go so far as to say empathy, but that understanding of the fact that he was doing what was quote unquote normal for everybody that was in that area? It wasn't like he was the guy that invented the concept of grave robbing and stripping stuff off of the Parthenon.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other flip side of it. If you create you don't have to create a villain where there already is one. What you have to do is you have to accurately describe that person. And and Elgin, was he was a diplomat. He was young. He found himself, in front of the Sultan as being the representative of England, of Britain. Britain had just, the British Navy had just defeated Napoleon, and they returned control of the Suez to the Turks. Of the Suez, of the Amazon. they returned. They were not the Amazon. It is the Suez. They returned complete control to them, and that was a gesture that was amazing. They defeated their foe, and then they give them over control of the entire port. That was the most significant to their power base. So, and Elgin shows up as the representative of this country. So anything he asked for, he was given. And when he pursued, that, and when he walked around and saw the Parthenon and all these other treasures, he recognized what they were. He was a product of, of English, aristocracy. He knew the significance of them. He knew Roman antiquities, and now he recognized this preceded that. This is older than Rome. Holy mackerel! What is this? Look at this temple. I can't believe it. He thought it was an opportunity for him. These people don't know, these Turks don't know what they have here. he wasn't concerned with the Greeks who were underneath the Turks, who may have, created it. His goal was, holy mackerel, I can be a star at home if I take this back. I can be, the torchbearer, and the bringer of light, and and open up a whole new avenue of history, to our enlightened people. So he thought, it was just an opportunity. He found himself in the right position. At that time, you could bribe somebody. Bribery was acceptable, when you have to deal with these subcultures, perhaps as the British would look at them. So bribery was normal. He took advantage of his situation. I argue strenuously that he exceeded what was normal and acceptable in some of the things, some of the actions that he did. But the way that I tried to write him in this novella was really less to create a villain rather than perhaps more to explain, the thought process of what he was going through.
I was trying to think. I almost went to the internet over here on the other screen to look up. The Parthenon's one of the seven wonders of the world, right?
No, they never did, because when they decided which were the seven wonders, they hadn't found the Parthenon yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They found the Colossus of Rhodes. I don't know, and they missed the Parthenon, but okay.
Well, I mean, even with that said, it's still definitely as one of the wonders of the world, even if it doesn't make the top seven on whoever made that list.
Yeah, it's over 2,500 years old, and it's still standing.
Yeah. And it's an amazing structure, but I wonder in my mind, because of how well the marbles stood up, what's still there, how amazing would that structure look if it hadn't been looted like that at that time?
Absolutely. In 14, I want to say about 1450, there was a war with the Venetians, and the Venetians were in the port of Athens, and they were firing out cannonballs, against the Turks when they were in their war. And the Turks had stored ammunition in the Parthenon because it was way up in the castle, so high up, it was very difficult to get to, and it was a very safe place for them, they thought, to store their ammunition. Unfortunately, one of these cannons hit a big cache of ammunition and blew up. And when it blew up, it blew the roof off. So as of the mid 1400s, it still had a roof. So imagine that, a roof that withhold almost 2,000 years. Crazy.
And that's probably the hardest part when you're writing, historic fiction, is trying to describe something that you can only really see in your mind's eye, and it just doesn't really do it justice.
Yeah, it's hard.
To what it must have looked back, 600 years ago now. So I know we talked about, with the Why Don't We Sue the British Museum, some practical things that people could do to be part of your nonprofit and stuff like that. Is that your hope with this, or are you just kind of wanting to inform people? What would you like to see come out of this particular book?
I really would like people to enjoy it, first of all, as just a work of historical fiction, to take you back to that period in the early 1800s, what it would have been like to live under occupation, and understand that the Parthenon held significant meaning to those people at that time, not just us today, those people at that time who were witness to it being torn apart and were not able to stop that. And I think that's the point of it. If we were sitting here today, you and I, in New York, watching the Statue of Liberty again as the example, if we were watching that get torn apart and we weren't able to stop it, that time frame while you're struggling to stop it, the struggle you're going through, the pain, the fight, that's what this story is about. And it's the same meaning, perhaps even more, because that's preceded these people by 1900 years. So it's always been a part of their society and their parents and grandparents and great all the way back, and they were forced to watch it be ripped apart. and that's a real pain, and it still exists to this day. How many generations after, so I think for us as Americans, I think this should be a nice, it should be a nice eye opener to sort of understand, what the real impact, of slavery is. And this is probably a different form than I think most Americans are used to seeing. It doesn't deal with, slavery here in the US. It deals with slavery, abroad, and the consequence of that. And I think there are a lot of parallels that can be drawn, between the two experiences. And hopefully people will, have a different appreciation for antiquities and really where they belong.
It for sure colors in my mindset going to a museum. Really different feel for that,
Yeah, if you knew the backstory, you might not want to go to the museum, huh?
Right? It's like, I mean, imagine if a guy had in his garage, a display of all the stuff he had stolen from, I
Right.
mean, there are court cases that are all about the guy's display of his stuff in his garage.
Exactly right. That's exactly right, Steve. Yeah.
Well, the book is called Make Me Breathless and I'll Still Sing. It's by Michael Reppas. It is available for free today and tomorrow. I'm going to put the link in again. You can get it. Michael, the story is so amazing to me. I almost want you to write another book because I just enjoyed them all so much. But thank you so much for making this in story form to, make it real for some of us. I really appreciate that.
I appreciate your time and thanks for spreading the word.
Yeah. Thanks for being with me on the show here today.
Thank you. Take care, Steve.